This is CFO IQ. Hi, I'm Andy Zizas, host of CFO IQ, publisher of CFO Intelligence Magazine, and chief strategist and CEO at Real Estate Strategies Corporation. Here on CFO IQ, we talk with forward-thinking CFOs from exciting enterprise and middle market companies, as well as some highly accomplished subject matter experts. Our goal is to bring you experience-based intelligence and the insights of highly accomplished CFOs and others to help you acquire, understand, and use knowledge, make you a more successful CFO, and to increase your CFO IQ. Welcome to CFO IQ. We're glad you're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to CFO IQ. I'm your host, Andy Zizas. On today's show, I'm joined by an impressive executive from IBM, who's here to talk to us today and share his insights on artificial intelligence. Joining me today is Matt Konwiser, cross-brand technical leader and field CTO at IBM. Matt's also a contributing columnist to CFO Intelligence Magazine. Today, Matt and I will discuss how CFOs can best capitalize on AI. Good afternoon, Matt. Welcome to CFO IQ. Nice to see you again.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here. Good to see you as well.
It's always great to be with you, Matt. I'm really grateful and appreciative that you chose to be with us and share some of your expertise with us. You've done a wonderful job in sharing your ideas with us at our CFO Intelligence events. That's wonderful to have you here on CFO IQ.
I appreciate that. It's always fun to be a part of your events, and you've got a great crowd that always shows up. So it's fun conversation every time.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. So we're here today to talk about AI, artificial intelligence. We've talked about this a few times. You and I have had some really great conversations. We've shared discussions with CFOs. The world is talking about AI and has been talking about AI for a while now. It's not a new topic, but it gets more and more exciting every day. Share with us the current state, just in a general term. What's the current state of AI?
It's important that I put this out there first because of the introduction you gave me. When I do these interviews and we have these conversations, what I'm really speaking from is my personal point of view, right? So I'll just put that out there first because the question you asked is a great one, but it's also a very controversial one. And I think in a word, the answer is hectic. We see changes, innovations, new capabilities being introduced in the field of AI almost daily at this point. And we see minor disruptions like a new version of something that's been out for years. And we see major disruptions, things like what happened with DeepSeek just a few weeks ago. And both of these things create a state of constant change where people feel like they always have to be on top of everything that comes out or they're already behind. And that's really the state of things right now. There is the most recent thing one is that people are talking about AGI now as being an almost imminent reality. And now that's kind of shaking up the whole conversation trope about, well, what does that mean? What is it going to do? How is it going to impact people? So hectic is the best way to say it, Andy, and that's kind of where we're at.
Expand on that for me. What's AGI?
So AGI, artificial general intelligence, is basically a point when an AI reaches a state of autonomy and human or greater than human level reasoning and logic. So effectively being able to have a model wake up in the morning, get turned on by its creators, and then just decide what it's going to do that day based on what's happening in the news or when it looks at somebody's schedule, and it just starts doing. And it does it as well as, if not better than, the human that would have been sitting in that same role. That's what AGI is. It's that level of self-reliance and autonomy and capability and maturity of logic and reasoning where a human is almost optional in the role.
Is that the part where the machines start making the Terminators?
No, so there's another tier, right? ASI, artificial superintelligence. That's what people call the singularity, the point when kind of machines just take over everything. And that's the Terminator, Skynet, the Borg from Star Trek, like that. That's that. So AGI is really just being able to hire a machine to do kind of a person's job for certain tasks and have it do it pretty self-sufficiently. We're nowhere near the singularity stuff yet, but it's definitely a roadmap.
So we're at least a few weeks away from Skynet and the Terminator and the Borg and all that stuff.
Give or take a few hours. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So since we're not worried about Skynet taking over, let's talk about CFOs. In particular, CFOs are asking themselves a lot of questions about AI, and as it relates to things like things they do every day, financial forecasting and planning. How can AI become an effective tool, or has it already become? And what's next from in the CFO suite relative to financial planning and forecasting?
So when we talk about AI in this context, especially when it comes to number crunching, traditional number crunching, because that's what forecasting and planning is. Linear data, time series information, right? That's the bread and butter of the CFO. So when we talk about AI today, people typically think of AI as being ChatGPT or DeepSeek or other things, and those are generative models, right? So generative models typically don't do time series all that well. At least they're not natively designed for it. So AI can absolutely enhance and has been enhancing financial forecasting and planning for a very long time through machine learning. So the important thing about that is machine learning is just teaching a machine how to do a linear progression or a time series calculation, having it look at a bunch of historical information and figure out where the next point on the plot sits. And machine learning can do that without needing a chatbot or a generative model or ChatGPT or a Claude or a Meta or things like that. So where things get interesting, though, is if you take the traditional machine learning that would do the forecasting and planning and add large language models or generative AI to that, what else can you do with it? So that's where we're seeing some interesting things. So there's two main use cases. I was at an S&P conference a few weeks ago talking about, or there was a person there talking about the use of synthetic data. So synthetic data is being able to look at points on a graph and look at the gaps in it and then use artificial data to fill in the gaps in a way that it looks real. And then being able to crunch that together. So what that allows you to do now is predictive analysis out into the future, even if you're in what might be uncharted territory. So you could, if you want to go into a new business venture or you want to invest in an area or look at spend in an area that you are launching where you've got no historical information, you might be able to extract models and data from other businesses that are similar, even with other companies, as long as it's public information, and then be able to use that as a combination of synthetic, generative, and machine learning to be able to build what might be a forecast or a planning timeline when traditionally, if you didn't have anything to go off of, you didn't have any way to predict it. So that could be a really interesting use case.
Matt, in a case like that where synthetic data is being applied, is the instance of synthetic data being identified so that the recipient of the report recognizes that some of the data is not actual?
Yeah, so that's where it gets interesting. So that would be up to the responsibility of the person that creates it to label it as such. There's no automatic tag, and the way synthetic data works is it looks so much like the real thing that it's essentially indistinguishable. So you have to be very careful with how you choose to use that. A lot of people use synthetic data for internal modeling and process, just to say, how would I simulate this if I have nothing to work off of? Let me see what the time series might look like, or let me try a few things and figure out how to fill in the gaps in my graph. And you'll generate synthetic data to do that. And that's perfectly fine. When you start to use it for public reporting, that's when you have to be very, very careful and make sure that your disclosures are in place. It's not that you can't do it. You just have to make sure that if and when you're doing it with full transparency and disclosure.
So let's continue. You mentioned reporting, and we're talking about risk now based on one particular instance of synthetic data. Mm-hmm. Let's take it further from synthetic data to back to AI as a whole. Talk to me about the risks and the challenges that CFOs have to deal with deploying AI relative to public reporting or even reporting for private companies.
One of the ways we see it most often used in finance when it comes to risk and compliance reporting is summarization. You feed a large language model or a generative AI information about risk and compliance laws, audit, local regulatory needs, operating documents for the business, and you have it look at all of the materials that are produced by the business that are required for these regulatory audits. And you'll have it kind of munge all that together and output something nice and clean and concise, either for a risk and compliance officer or an auditor to be able to submit, or as the actual final report. Now, the value to this is tremendous because it can consume reams and reams of data that is required for these reports and output it very cleanly, potentially even in a tabular format. And it's pretty much done. You push the button, it spits it out, you submit it, and you're finished, right? So this works really well as long as it's not fabricating something. And that's the risk. So we talk about risk and compliance. So I'll talk about compliance as it relates to audit and reporting. I'll talk about risk as it relates to the risk of using it for that, right? So the concern could be, and we've seen this happen in law already a few times, judges have actually yelled at lawyers for using GPT to create their arguments and then finding out that GPT has completely fabricated some of the case law that it's used as the foundation for the argument, right? So the same risk exists for these types of reports. If you use it and you use something that's too broadly trained, or you're not governing it correctly and monitoring it correctly, it could produce something very, very clean that could be exactly the format you need, and the information in it could be completely incorrect. And so you just have to be ultra aware that that risk exists and be very deliberate and precise when you choose how you're going to do it, what model you're going to use, what information you're going to give it, and what you ask it. Because all of these things are different. I actually published on LinkedIn recently a very funny piece that wasn't meant to be funny at all. And I had asked a generative model to create an image for me that had a newspaper on a breakfast table at somebody's house that had tomorrow's date on it. And it was February 27th, I think. So I was expecting it to generate an image where the paper just says February 28th, 2025. And instead, it generated everything perfectly, but on the newspaper, it just said tomorrow's date. And I was like, am I being pranked here? Like, you know, I mean, this is supposed to be this super intelligent thing, and tomorrow's date is a pretty standard temporal reference that it should be able to work out. Because if I were to just ask it, what is tomorrow's date? It would say February 28th, 2025. Yet when I asked it to do so in an image, it just put tomorrow's date. So these are the things you have to be really careful of. And it was my fault because I didn't ask the right question in a very specific way. That same kind of thing could happen when you're dealing with it for risk and compliance. Right. You just have to know that these things can happen.
So let's stay on the topic of risk and talk about something that's very important to CFOs, cyber risk, fraud. How can CFOs best capitalize on the opportunity that AI presents to identify, capture, and minimize fraud and cyber risk?
So that's another really good one. So the question is very timely because Deloitte had just put out their year-end report of 2024 about the most significant benefits and capabilities of AI and generative AI. And one of the strongest respondents of a use case that had exceeded expectations was for cybersecurity. And it was in the context of cyber analysis and fraud detection and cybersecurity overall. And the reason why I believe it can do so well, and I'm not going to rehash Deloitte's report, but you can certainly find that on the web. But the reason why I think that probably happened that way is because when you look at cybersecurity and fraud, these are human things, right? It's not a bug in a code that just something breaks. Somebody is very intentionally trying to engineer their way into an environment, and they're going to use sometimes very creative methods, right? So when I used to work on anti-money laundering and fraud cases, when I worked in cybersecurity 10 years ago, one of the things that we would need to do was, for example, correlate the number of microtransactions that were occurring over a specific period of time that all, even if they came from different bank accounts going to different bank accounts, if equal amounts of money were then moved on the back end to another bank account, and then all of that exceeded $10,000, and then billing and address and invoices, when you looked at satellite data, didn't match what it was supposed to be for, you can figure out that somebody's trying to commit fraud, right? That's a complicated case. Some of the easier ones are things like insurance fraud, like, I'm claiming a car accident and you're driving around in a Lamborghini that's completely pristine, right? So clearly something's wrong. Either way, you need to take vast amounts of information, put it all together, correlate it, prove it or disprove it, and then generate enough evidence that you can then prosecute or go after somebody. Well, a generative model, because it understands images and text and spoken word and video, is really good at that. Because if it's trained for fraud, you can just throw it at a lake of information and have it go off and find all the pieces that correlate to a single thing. We used to call it link analysis. I don't know what they call it anymore now that we're in generative, but it does that really well because it's all about finding needles and needle stacks and then putting them together to say, yeah, these all belong in the same sewing kit. And that's fraud. Cybersecurity is effectively the same thing in a much more constrained scale. You're looking for all these different indicators of threat or indicators of compromise in your environment. And you have to go through reams and reams of data points from all these different sources and put them all together and then say, yeah, this is one story arc. Again, humans can do that, but it could take months to do it, whereas an AI might be able to do it in hours or weeks. Always need human oversight, though. Never just trust the machine blindly to say, this is definitely fraud, this is definitely a cyber incident. But a human plus a machine to do all that together could potentially save thousands or millions of dollars.
To do the sorting and the interpretation and the assumptions.
And time to detect.
Okay, so let's come back now to the broader picture. CFOs, chief financial officers, they're focused primarily on finance and operations, and then beyond that, a whole lot of other things. Talk to me about how AI can help CFOs optimize cost reduction and driving operational efficiency across the enterprise.
This is one of the biggest struggles, frankly, right? Because a lot of people think that AI is cheap, and it's not. It is very, very costly. So there were some studies that were doing estimates of the average startup cost and run cost of AI in a large enterprise. And it was anything from $5 to $100 a person to get started and 50 cents to $6 a person to operate over a time period on a daily basis or a weekly basis.
When you say a person, you mean an employee?
Yes, a human being.
So it would be that number times the number of employees in a company.
Correct. So a lot of times you see like, oh, you can sign up for this online service for $19.99 a month, and that's all well and good, but that's the most cursory type of deployment for AI, and it doesn't give you deep customization, and it doesn't account for the other big thing, getting your house in order first. Most businesses are just not ready to drop AI in on top and have it just work. It goes back to the risk and compliance concerns. Because remember, an AI, if you pointed at everything, it sees everything. So if you have that one random document that nobody ever aged out, that's 8 years old, that has wrong information for current times, the AI is going to find that. And if it has pieces of data in it that'll fit the bill for what it's been asked to do, it will use it. A human might look at it and be like, yeah, no, that shouldn't even be there. And AI is just going to be like, I was told to look here and it's there, so I'm using it. So the ROI, or the cost reduction and operational efficiency of AI, is predicated on an enterprise's readiness to put AI in, the understanding of all the costs that get associated with it, and then obviously a clear use case for it. So companies like IBM, and this is public information, if you were to Google search IBM Client Zero, you will find references to it on our website. We actually implemented it for finance and HR internally. And our cost savings was realized to be tremendous because we had our ducks in a row already. We have all the tools, obviously, that we need for it. So dropping AI on top made sense. And what we were able to do was effectively cost optimize and shape not only the way the tools and the systems work, but also the way that people work with them. if I need to put in vacation time or get information about benefits or fill out a complex HR case or form for something, there's systems that orchestrate all the different back-end systems and forms and personnel and notifications now that are all largely AI driven. And that the deployment of that has resulted in significant cost reduction and increased efficiency. But there was a lot that had to be done to get to that point. It's not a shot in the dark. There are some very clear value statements, but there's a lot that has to get done, and you have to go into it eyes wide open.
Okay, that sounds like you said, it's costly, but it's efficient as hell.
Yeah, once it's running, it's efficient, right? It's not, oh, $19.99 a month, here's my credit card. Right, you have to be prepared for it, right? It's like any company that's ever done build mode, right? We used to do incubators when I worked in a previous company, and your margins are out the window for the first year or two, right? You're putting 50, 60, 70% of your total budget into R&D with very little return, with the understanding that after 2 to 3 years, you go back down to 15 to 20% R&D, you've got a 20 to 30% margin, and then the rest of it is operating costs. So you're going to work at a loss for a little while, but you're going to realize the gains over time. And I think that if people approach AI like that, they'll be far more realistic in their expectations from a financial returns and what it'll do, and things will be much more successful. And people may realize return much faster than that. It will happen. But if you have that kind of average or worst case in mind, things will just go smoother.
Okay, so let's build off efficiency and let's talk about ethics and regulatory issues. What considerations should CFOs be focused on as it relates to, we want to deploy AI, we want to achieve this. How do we make sure we're utilizing the AI ethically and avoiding regulatory issues?
So I just had a conversation about this with a colleague yesterday. And I think that, first of all, ethics is a very tricky topic when it comes to AI. So I will renew that these are just my personal thoughts, and I'm not representing IBM in what I say here. But one of the best examples I can give you on ethics and the challenges with ethics and AI is this one. So Andy, I know you're a family man, as am I, and we care about kids and communities. That matters to both of us. So I asked a public model off the shelf that a lot of people are using for a lot of things today. I asked it to generate an image of an extension cord with 2 male ends. And it immediately said, nope, not going to do that. That's dangerous. People use it to hurt themselves, and it's horrible. It's a terrible thing to do. You can buy that at Walmart today for $9. They use it to connect generators to houses and things like that. So it won't let me generate an image of something that is actually readily available and has a valid use case, okay? Citing concerns for safety of children and health. The same model, I said, generate an image for me of a motorist driving recklessly and speeding past an elementary school with children playing at the curb. And it did it immediately. That's not governance. That's not regulatory. That's ethics. Because somebody decided that it was going to code the model that it shouldn't generate a picture of an extension cord that you can buy at the corner hardware store, but it would be acceptable to generate a picture of a motorist putting children's lives in danger. And this is where we have a problem with understanding the ethical considerations in AI, right? So somebody built those rules into the model that says this is okay, that's not okay, and here's the reasons why. When we use them for our business, we have to think about it the exact same way. What are we doing with the models, and which models are we choosing, and how are they built? Because what if we needed to do something? Let's say you're testing pharmaceuticals. You may know a new compound could be hazardous, but you still want to generate it and simulate it to see its effects in interaction with other compounds or certain hazardous diseases or horrible things in the world. If the model says, no, I won't do that because that's dangerous, that defeats the purpose of using it for the researcher. Somebody else's ethics is now taking the place of the purpose of it for the business. So the ethical considerations are massive. Now, the regulatory considerations are also massive, because you've got the initiatives that are happening around the world amongst AI producers who are agreeing that they will openly disclose all of their guardrails and ethics and parameters for the models. And then you have the closed models that are largely targeting the consumer spaces that will not disclose that information. But you also now have regulators that are introducing state and local bills to govern the use and application of AI for different types of businesses or different types of information. So you've got to figure out how all of those three things intersect. And if you're a large multinational organization, you may have to comply with a multitude of those laws. We used to do this all the time. If we had data in Germany or France, we had to keep it in Germany and France. You couldn't have that data be moved across the pond into the US or in different data centers because of the privacy and protection laws that exist in those countries, right? So with AI, if you have a human reading information off of a screen that's coming from a data repository in France or Germany and feeding it into a model, and that model is hosted somewhere else, you're now taking that information and you become the exfiltration, even if you're keeping it within the country, but now you're violating those regulations. So
how do you regulate against that, or how do you create gates to keep that from happening?
Humans, human training, human awareness, human education. It's the same example when I had a debate with somebody about AI being dangerous. I said, is the knife in your house dangerous that you use to cut vegetables or meat? They said, yeah, of course it is. I said, why do you have it in your house then? Well, because it's utility. We need it. I said, that's right. So how do you make sure that the people who come to your house don't hurt themselves or do something they're not supposed to with that knife? Well, it's partially common sense, and it's partially I've taught my kids that they're never to touch them. Bingo. AI is the same way. You have to approach it like a set of kitchen knives, high utility, very functional. You can't throw it out, but the humans that are involved have to be aware of the liability they assume when they pick that knife out of the butcher block and start to use it for something. If they cut themselves, they can't blame the owner of the knife because they were the one that assumed the liability of using it and they cut themselves. So, I mean, that's kind of where my head is on that.
You know, it's very interesting in terms of your thought about pulling information globally and the different regulations that would exist and the gates that do or don't exist from various locations. And I think about when you engage a consultant to write a report, and they do a lot of research and they pull information, they pull data from various locations. At the end of their report, there's usually a reference section, and they advise you as to what the sources of their information were. I pulled this document from this report. I pulled this document from this research institute, and we got this bit of information from this location. When you pull information from the internet, specifically through AI, you're right. You don't know where it's coming from, and there's no way to tell what the source is and how the information was interpreted. And
so this is where it gets interesting, Andy. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of even commercial models that are somewhat closed, there are ways to get it to reveal what its source was when it gives you information. So you can check it and make sure that it's viable, but you have to know to ask. That's the key, right? You can't just take for granted. You have to say, okay, that's interesting. Where did you get this passage from? Where did you get this fact from? And then the human has to follow the breadcrumbs and make sure that that source is reputable and relevant. So it's there if you want it and you know how to look for it, but it's still incumbent upon you to fact check it, not just blindly include the URL saying, oh, this is the source, right?
Let's talk about AI, not about finance, but something that the finance department focuses on, specifically the CFO. Workforce needs, skills development, not just within the finance department, but across the enterprise. How does AI guide a CFO in focusing on those issues?
Yeah, so there's two really kind of low-hanging fruit, great use cases for this. And the first is orchestration of tasks. So if you were to ask any of your CFOs, and I've spoken to a few of them in my time with you, so I think I know the answer, but if you were to say to them, out of their daily tasks and their daily functions, how many of those tasks would they consider to be simple? Just do one thing, one action, one step, 1 + 1 = 2, and boom, I'm done. None of them, right? Everything has codependencies. Everything has complications. And that's one of the things where I think AI can help with workforce perspective, because if you don't look at AI as something that will replace you, but something that will augment you, it can be a huge benefit, right? So if you can teach your AI model, especially if one that's dedicated to finance or operations, that within the company, when somebody makes this type of request, it has to come from these sources, and we're looking for this kind of data from this time series and this data range. Even if you don't have it do the calculations, even if you just have it grab the data and bring it to you, that saves time. And it's not replacing you, right? It's augmenting you, but it is going out and getting the information that you need and bringing it back to you. And a lot of these models will have the ability to very transparently show you every step of the way, right down to the construction of the query or the formula that it's building to extract the numbers that you need, the sources it's pulling from, the columns it's accessing in a spreadsheet and how it's doing its calculations, so that if it goes wrong, you can see where it went wrong. So it actually makes the human more relevant, because you need to make sure that you're there to look at it and correct it, because ultimately it's human generated data being stored in a machine and accessed by a machine, but then fed back to a human. So humans are the bookends, and very, very relevant. And in terms of skills, which is the other question. So I will admit that I use AI, not for my job, but for myself. I come across lots of interesting topics that I want to learn more about. And I will use AI to help me learn about it in a summarization sort of way, right? So for example, let's look at the term liquidity management, right? Liquidity management is a finance term. I'm not a finance person. I know what liquidity is. I know what management is, but I want to know more about what liquidity management as a concept is. So I could do one of two things. I could go to the library, because we still have those, believe it or not. And I could check out a book and read the entire book and maybe never find exactly the answer I'm looking for. I could Google search and hope that the keyword match liquidity management shows up on some finance bro website that will allow me to read it and learn about it. Or I can ask an AI that has read and been trained on myriad books and papers on all sorts of different things, and have it give it back to me in a summary that I can read in 2 paragraphs. I've now become smarter, but I don't become a liquidity management expert. I just understand the concept, and then I can do that and then do my own research and go deeper and explore different areas and facets. So it can augment a human's knowledge, and it can give them skills very quickly that they didn't previously have, so that they can just inject themselves into a conversation to figure out a use case more quickly. We're also starting to see, I think there was a magnet school in Arizona that recently announced that they are going to have AI teachers. So they have agreed to allow AI to actually teach the curriculum in certain subjects. So we're at a point of maturity. Again, I don't necessarily believe that AI will ever replace a teacher, or can even today, but it can provide enough value to a classroom that it can be an assistant and bring all that information out and into people, and just help them be smarter.
And do so in a precision manner for each individual student. I mean, I love the idea of utilizing, of you deploying AI to make yourself even smarter. At the very least, obtaining a summary generated by AI would make you conversational on a topic that you may not be conversational on, and that in and of itself could springboard you to realize, okay, I need to learn more. Let me go deeper and spend the time to actually get educated on this. I think that's a tremendous way to use AI. But I'm going to challenge you a little further. So we're staying on the subject of CFOs. let's talk about investor relations and financial disclosures. How can AI be utilized to improve those? Remembering that when it comes to financial disclosures, you referenced earlier in our discussion, we can't use synthetic information. So we're talking about really making them sharper, better, minimizing the time, and making sure that the company is reporting on a very efficient basis. How can AI help the CFO do that?
If I could, just a quick diversion on investor relations, because it's relevant. I don't know if you saw recently, NASDAQ just announced that they're going to allow 24-hour day trading. Did you see that?
I did.
They just opened that up. And I think about the fact that there's AI models out there that you can download. I think it's a couple $100 to put it on your computer, and it will just sit there and day trade, penny stock trade for you 24 hours a day. And it was, I think in the first few months that it was deployed, it was shown to have like a 1,200% return. Like it's something insane. So
sign me up.
Exactly, right? When you couple that now with 24-hour day trading, I mean, I think the whole landscape of what an investor actually is going to be different in the next few months. So anyway, but investor relations and financial disclosure. So going back to what I said earlier about regulatory, same use case, right? Collect all the information, understand what the template and the forms look like and should look like, and fill the data in. And you can use generative AI to create those investor relations materials, the prospectus, the quarterly reports, the annual reports, as well as all the financial disclosures. And you can do it two ways. You can have it generate the template and then tell you to fill in the data, or you can do all the information and have it just create the output for you as a finished product, with the asterisk that there should always be a human reading it before it gets published, because you do have the risk of confabulation or hallucination or drifting, where it just heads off of target entirely from what you originally asked it to do. So it saves a tremendous amount of time to compile all of that data and put it into one place to be used by a human to then be published. You can also, just as an interesting one, you can use it to do research to prepare investor relations materials. So for example, if you wanted to understand the potential impact of weather changes or legislative changes on the economy or on a specific business or type of business or commerce between countries, you could have it do that analysis and assessment, bring it back to a human, have them interpret that, and then incorporate relevant elements into the investor relations material. As long as somebody does, again, fact check it, right? Very important. Always check your facts when it comes to using this stuff. So there's really two different ways. You could have it create the template and the data fill, or you could have it do very advanced research in a more thorough and comprehensive way, so that when you publish these things, they are published in a more thorough way that would potentially attract more investors and alleviate some concerns of unknowns and other factors that might be sitting.
Okay, Matt, if I were to summarize our conversation, I'm pulling two major points out of what was a very detailed, very thorough conversation on a lot of different topics. I'm glad that you let me challenge you on a couple of things. But it sounds to me like if we were delivering a message to CFOs, and we are, in fact, the message in part is it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a significant investment to properly train an AI to do whatever it is you need it to do. And no matter what you utilize AI for, it is not a hands-off process. Ultimately, the end product, the decisions, all have to be viewed by humans. And this, Skynet is not creating the Terminators, and the machines aren't, the factories aren't operating automatically without any human intervention. The reality is, the AI is really a tool for human decision-making. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a very fair assessment. Yes, I agree with that entirely.
Matt, you know what? You and I could talk about this stuff for hours, and in fact, we have in the past. And I know we're going to be talking about this again. I'm grateful for your willingness to share your insights and your expertise with us on CFO IQ. It's always great to have you here. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Andy. Thank you again for having me, and a great conversation. And I love the challenges. Keep them coming.
Well, this is great. We're going to talk some more. And for those of you watching, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And I'd like to thank Matt Konwiser from IBM for sharing his ideas and his thoughts with us on how your company can drive value If you'd like to learn more about how you can drive value, if you'd like to learn more about Matt Konwiser or IBM's expertise, you'll be able to find a lot of information on all of the above at CFOIQ.com. I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you again, Matt, for being with us. I'm Andy Zizas. I'm your host at CFO IQ. We'll look forward to seeing you again real soon. This has been a production of CFO IQ. If you have topic suggestions, would like to be considered for an interview on CFO IQ, or if you'd like us to consider publishing your story in CFO Intelligence magazine, contact our host, Andrew Zizas, at andrew.zezas@cfointel.com. Thanks for joining us. Watch us wherever you watch your favorite podcasts, or visit us at cfoiq.com to view or listen to our next episode.